Hey guys, I'm here for an emergency video. Joe and I were just texting after the game and I was like ranting and super upset about it, and I went for a walk and I was still pretty annoyed about it. So I was like, you know what, let's just go on, have a video and just like talk out our feelings, talk about what went wrong in this game as well. I know it's not fun to relive these losses. I actually tried to make 2 videos and they both came out like a little too ranty for my liking. And so I was like, you know, I'm just going to take a break and look at it with fresh eyes again. And Joe's the perfect person to do that with. So Joe, thanks so much for joining me, especially so last minute.
Nice. Okay. As I say, with the WhatsApp conversation going on, we should always prioritize content generation. So why not have a discussion about it?
Yeah, awesome. So, guys, if you have any questions that you want us to answer about the game, please feel free. This is super last minute. We were just talking and like, let's hop on a stream right now. So, I don't have anything prepared. We're just kind of going to go with the flow and see what comes up. But, Joe, just initial feeling, like, how are you feeling during that game, after the game? What was going through your head?
Oof. I think generally I have a rule of thumb with Chelsea, and that is I can probably predict how the game is going to go after like the first 10 minutes. And I could see sort of early on there were signs that we were struggling to play out from the back. The front three were pretty much anonymous, and I think a lot of it is to do with just the inability to connect the team. I think West Brom, Big Sam he's not one of these managers who's going to come here and try and play against us. I think he's quite content to sit back and look for opportunities. And I think playing kind of the 2 banks of 5 that they did, pressing really high, putting Jorginho and Cover under pressure, when that kind of broke down a bit, I think the rest of the team massively suffered. I wouldn't say that we scored against the run of play, but it kind of a little bit came out of nowhere. Good free kick from Alonso, and I think Pulisic did well to follow up and finish. But it wasn't really like we'd had this overwhelming sort of positive performance before that. I think that West Brom had largely contained us and stopped us from kind of playing. And then obviously the kind of the fateful sort of moment in the game with Thiago Silva being sent off. And I think the concerning thing and probably the worrying thing for me was just the way that we completely capitulated after the red card. I mean, I've not seen, I know that there was 5 minutes of added time, but that just kind of dramatic turnaround in terms of the game. And then in the second half particularly, I felt that we looked very chaotic, under Tuchel, where used to seeing this very structured, very organized team. Guys know what they're doing, sort of movement patterns, passing patterns. In second half, and we switched sort of to 10 men, and it's a completely different feel. But the speed or the hastiness with which we looked super compact and super structured to just chaotic and completely all over the place was a little bit concerning. And I know that I've maybe been a little bit not vocal, but kind of cautious in my kind of praise of this system and how it works. And I've had this fear maybe that it is protecting certain players, and maybe when some of the structure breaks down, you kind of see the real components. I sort of felt particularly kind of first half when we were under pressure, but then after the red card, we really did sort of fall to pieces in a really, really bad way. And one thing I'd say as well, people saying that it's a bad reaction to what was a bad performance. I don't think we played particularly well against Leeds, and I don't think we played particularly well against Sheffield United as well. Yes, the Atletico Madrid game was absolutely superb, but I would naturally expect Chelsea to play well in a big game against a big team. I think that we have struggled, and we continue to struggle against quote unquote lesser sides that we should beat, sides who are happy to sit back, sides who are maybe have a lot more energy in their team. I think West Brom were really, really energetic first half. So it's not always the big games that I'm concerned about. It's the sort of the games today where West Brom, where I think they came with a game plan, they executed it better than us. We had some really poor individual performances that didn't help. But that breakdown and that sort of, the way that the team kind of fell apart a little bit when it started to go wrong. I don't want to sort of raise the white flag and get sort of super panicky, but considering we haven't really seen the team look like that at all under Tuchel, it's been very measured, very controlled. To see that kind of dissension into what was at times, the second half, I don't really know what kind of system you could have said we were playing. Yes, it's 10 men. Yes, it's a hugely different game. But towards the end, you're chasing goals. You've got Marcos Alonso just standing in a number 10 position. You've got all random players in random areas of the pitch Kurt Zuma overlapping on the left wing. It all went a little bit crazy. And I think that is probably, one thing to sort of note going into the Porto game and beyond now. Obviously, we have a run of games in the Premier League against teams who are probably going to be fairly similar in terms of how they set up to West Brom. So I'm hopeful that we can use Porto as a springboard back into some sort of good form, because we are going to have some challenging games coming up in the future.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack here. So, like, why do you think that Chelsea play well in these bigger games, but against teams that we should definitely be beating? And I understand that, West Brom had a week really to prepare for this game, because a lot of their players really aren't going out on international duty. Most of Chelsea's team was out on international duty. Tuchel came and said that they took like 3 to 4 flights. They got back really late to London. They had one day to prepare. And I feel like you could really see that in this game, that everybody looked really lethargic. They looked tired, but it's a theme that we've seen recurring, that for some reason against these sides that Chelsea really should be beating, we struggle against them, and and this was an open game, so it's not like they were playing 10 men behind the ball and we were struggling to break down a low block. That wasn't it at all. It was just that we could not score and we were outplayed. So what do you think the issue with that is? And also, I just want to add that, after the red card comes, you're like, oh shit, red card after 30 minutes. Like, it's not like it's later in the game and you can kind of hold off for 10-15 minutes or so. Like, there was still an hour left to play, but I would expect the team to kind of like sit back and absorb the pressure. And we just saw this team fall apart. And that makes me question the mentality of these players again, because I feel like this is something that we've seen over seasons from Mourinho, even, that these players tend, and you don't even have that many players since Mourinho, but it's just like consistently the players under Mourinho, under Conte, under Sarri, under Lampard, they're all complaining about the mentality. So do you think that plays plays a part into it at all?
Yeah, I think that the last point you mentioned there is super interesting to me in particular. I've looked into, kind of, let's say, our worst performances over the past couple of seasons. And the only common denominator that we have is that a large portion of the squad are kind of there. And I do feel a little bit that there has been a kind of culture that sort of crept into the club that's allowed standards to drop. And you could say it's almost kind of post-JT in that respect, when he sort of leaves the club, and this kind of, he was a standard bearer. If you listen to particularly any interviews with players who have played with him, he would maintain standards even when he wasn't, playing week in, week out for Chelsea. He would ensure that those standards in training were there. I mean, that's just one aspect of it, kind of as well. But when you have, managers from different backgrounds, different playing styles, different player preferences, all suggesting that there is some sort of inherent weakness in the mentality of this Chelsea squad, I think that as fans, we often kind of back the players over the manager in many respects. But maybe it's time, not to have a conversation where we create this kind of pile-on culture and start sort of ripping into players. But I don't think we look enough at, the sort of the structure of the squad, who the leaders are, because your personality or your culture of your football team represents the big personalities of the people in the squad. And as much as I love Cesar Azpilicueta, he's not a forceful captain or like a John Terry. The thing for me, and again, this is a little bit kind of Brexity and agrarian, but I love it when captains sort of run up to referees and start complaining and players sort of pile in, because it shows to me that there's a passion and that they really sort of care and they want to sort of mix it up. I can't remember the last time. I think I might have had this conversation with you a while ago, when I can't remember the last time that a Chelsea player got booked for dissent. We're such a nice group of nice players now, and it's it has its benefits in terms of how we play and stuff. But I think there are times, as you say, particularly after a red card, trying to hold on, having that mentality that we're not going to concede to half time, because you never know. If we go in at 1-0, Tuchel has time to reorganise, 15 minutes of a break. Coming into that second half, it's a completely different equation. But we've almost lost that game in like a 5-minute period. And the crazy thing was, when they scored the equaliser, I had a feeling that they were going to score again before half time. And I haven't had that feeling with the side for a while. But as you say, it was almost like the off switch had been hit on the team, like the mentality. Someone just switched it off and it just completely fell apart. I mean, that side of it is definitely, I think, something to consider. Looking at sort of the things that we've spoken about before, really, in terms of how this Chelsea side play and maybe the success that we've had against bigger teams. I think when teams come to Stamford Bridge, or if we play them away, or whatever the situation is, when they have a genuine desire to try and win the game, we can control the ball, we can control possession, we can kind of control the sort of the elements within the game. I think when teams sit back and ask us to be the aggressor, that we don't have that capability. And some of it comes from the fact that we have, for the most part, like today, for example, you could argue there were 7 defensive players starting. I know this is something we've spoken about quite a lot. And I think that when it comes to teams recognising that we do struggle to break, West Brom had a back 5 today. It wasn't a back 3. They had a flat back 5 with 4 midfielders basically playing in front of them. And they were content to say, okay, Jorginho, Kovacic, you're going to have a lot of the ball. Break us down, because we don't think you can. And then it gets into this sort of pattern of play that we saw a little bit under Lampard, which is, okay, we can't go through the middle. We don't have the confidence to play the pass, or maybe we don't have the ability, or we don't have the movement from the forwards. Get it wide to Reece James and let Reece James whack a cross in. And then Reece James is crossing to 5'10", 5'11" Timo Werner. So you're then back to that problem that Lampard had, which is why are we, sending 3, 4, 5 really good crosses, to be fair to Reece. Some of the crosses he put in today were really good. But why are we sending him into the penalty area when we don't have a player in there who's over, 5'11"? So it's familiar patterns emerging again.
Yeah. And what do you feel about, we spoke about Jorginho a little bit, but I was also, I thought that Kovacic didn't have a good first half at all either. I thought they both had pretty abysmal first halves, and then Kovacic looked better in the second half, and he looked like he stepped up. But something that was a little bit frustrating for me, I know that goal scoring is not his strong suit, right? I know that it's not part of his game. But he was taking shots on goal, and I was like, come on, this definitely isn't going in. You just don't have a good shot on you. I would much prefer that he makes an additional pass to somebody who can have more of a chance of scoring a goal, and what do you think the problem is with this? Do you see a problem with this partnership? Because sometimes I feel like it looks really good, other times it looks really bad. And like you said, the problem that I had was that we were still playing in a back 5. We still had 5 defenders, Jorginho and Kovacic on, and we conceded 5 goals. Yeah. So that really shouldn't be happening, especially with the amount of defenders that you have on the pitch. So do you see any problem with that? Where do you think that weakness lies, and how can Chelsea change that to go forward?
Yeah, I think today, I'm not Jorginho's biggest fan on the best of days, but I think he was, particularly poor today. And even people that really, really like him as a player, I don't think you could argue that he wasn't sort of noticeably poor, let's say. I'll put it in a polite fashion. He was noticeably poor today. And I kind of think Kova got sort of dragged into that a little bit, because I felt at times he was super isolated in midfield. And some uncharacteristic errors were kind of creeping into his game. He lost the ball an awful lot today in really dangerous areas, and that's not something that you typically associate with Kova. You give him the ball when he's under pressure. You know that he can do that little sort of shimmy and roll, and he sort of plays a sort of a safe pass away from danger. Today, a couple of times, certainly noticeably first half, but second half as well, when he was maybe trying too hard to sort of be the catalyst for the team. He was getting the ball played to midfield, and somebody was nicking it, and then boom, they were straight running at a back 3. And those problems are very familiar to what we've seen with Lampard, and even going back to Sarri as well. The ability for, I think, people to run at our defenders by just winning one very quick and simple tackle in midfield is something that I think has been a long-standing problem. But yeah, both of them in terms of sort of the kind of the stuff that they do in the attacking third, I think a lot of Chelsea fans have convinced themselves that midfielders aren't supposed to really influence in the final third because of what we've seen for the past number of seasons. Kante is great defensively, and he's a great presser and all this sort of stuff, but occasionally he will do something great in the final third, but it's not his forte. You could say the same about pretty much any other central midfielder that we have. If you look at sort of world football and you look at maybe the way the game is going, you need people, particularly in those areas, who can do a little bit of everything in terms of the game, and they have to have some capacity to influence in the final third. I think certainly today what we saw was West Brom really, really zeroing in on them as a pair. And I noticed something in the first half that I haven't seen many teams do. When we try to play out from the back, we do something where it's called staggering in midfield. So you have Jorginho comes a bit deeper, Kovacic maybe comes 10 yards further up the pitch, creates kind of like a natural angle for them to kind of pass the ball to one another. When Kova was trying to create that angle now, what West Brom were doing was actually sending their winger to sprint in to mark him. So that kind of, those sort of two like passes that they probably play, with their eyes closed and blindfolded. once that was sort of taken out of the game and then they became under pressure, I think what we saw was a lot of the frustrations that people had with them maybe under Sarri and a little bit under Lampard was that, once you take out the pattern of play or the automatic pass, the vision, the creativity, maybe the freedom to then try something else or to play in different areas is not there. And I think we saw it today, particularly with Jorginho. I think he does give the ball away a little bit on times, but today, the 2 yellow cards for Thiago Silva pretty much come down for him making 2 very poor passes in really dangerous areas. So, it's going to be interesting. I think we're playing Porto on Wednesday, whether Kante is going to be fit. Because if that midfield plays against the energy that Porto have in midfield, I'm actually quite concerned they're going into that game. Whereas, before today, I was pretty confident that we would handle them pretty well. But their energy and their ability to press us is dangerous if, teams are going to start realizing that actually if you can just sort of mark the pair of them, then that massively impacts the rest of the team. And then, as I sort of mentioned in sort of the very first part of the stream here, once you take them out of the game, your only real options are Marcus Alonso and Reece James, because our front three at the moment could not get into the game at all. And they're not the kind of players that you can just, bypass midfield, chip it over into their chest or to their head and expect them to be, Didier Drogba or Diego Costa, hold the ball up and bring people into play. It's, it limits us when we can't play through midfield. And I think if teams use this as a blueprint, what West Brom did, it's problematic, because the next couple of games we've got like Brighton and Fulham and teams that I expect to sit off of us and say same questions in terms of West Brom, like, can you break us down? Those are going to be games that are going to be tricky for us to win, particularly if we're playing this style again and it's the same kind of pace and teams are taking out those passing angles. But yeah, that's why I'm probably more concerned about the next couple of Premier League games rather than maybe some of the bigger games we've got to finish the season.
Well, my problem is like it's all great that we're doing so well in the Champions League, and it makes me so happy when we do well in the Champions League. But if we don't secure Champions League for next season, because we're probably not going to win it this season, let's be real, then we're going to have major problems next season, because you get a lot of revenue from securing a top 4 spot. You get the Champions League TV revenue, and then also you don't get to attract players because they want to play in the Champions League. So it's really difficult. And so why do you think that the other teams, if they can just mark Jorginho or mark Kovacic out of a game, why haven't we been seeing this more? Like, surely we're going to be seeing this in the future. The teams are going to learn from this and they're going to be caught out again. What do you think?
I think I've seen teams try to do it, but I think the way that West Brom did it today was interesting, because where they played, instead of playing like a 4-3-3 or any kind of other sort of different formation that we see, where they played pretty much a flat midfield 4 at times, they could keep their 2 central midfielders in sort of good positions defensively. And what they were asking to do, instead of like your third man who's free, maybe pressing Kova or Jorginho and leaving the other spare, they were actually getting their wingers to kind of close in from either side. So they still had a spare man in midfield, because they could still bring the other guy in, tuck in, and have three central players. So you might have, I saw today, for example, their right-hand sided midfielder tucked in or came to press Jorginho and Kovacic, and then sort of the left midfielder kind of tucked in, and they still had really good numbers in midfield, and they were still able to kind of press and play with energy. I think sometimes when teams press with maybe their forwards or maybe press with slightly different variations in midfield, they still leave kind of a spare man in terms of the way that they press. So the fact that they played a flat back 5 and they had this flat midfield 4, they had more bodies centrally than I think what we normally see teams play against us. You don't really see too many teams play like a 4-4-2 or with 4 kind of midfielders. And also as well, in terms of these guys playing wide, they were only really wide when West Brom had the ball. They were kind of very narrow, so they had like a very narrow midfield 4. So I think it was kind of a question of they wanted to use kind of the left and the right-hand side of guys to do sort of the pressing when Kova or Jorginho would try to sort of pivot and create that kind of staggered effect in midfield. But they would still have the 2 guys centrally. They would still have guys who could block the passing lanes, could sort of block all other different areas in midfield as well. So it'd be interesting to see, I think, if teams adopt that sort of strategy of playing a very, very narrow midfield, because what it will allow them to do is to press, but also to make sure that they have the passing angles covered. You'll notice certainly, like even as I say, but people were saying to me, before the red card, we weren't playing well at all. I mean, we really were struggling to get out, and that was primarily because they were shifting the ball or making us play through Reece James, play through Marcus Alonso. And with the sort of lack of movement ahead of the ball, it's always difficult for Reece and Marcus to play forward because, sometimes you're just playing a ball down the line and hoping that Timo or Christian or whoever can sort of get there. You can't chip a ball into a centre forward. You can't chip a ball into a number 8 or one of the 2 6s who's pushing up into midfield. There's really limited options for them in possession. So I think if I'm an opposition analyst or opposition coach, what I'm telling my manager to do is to try and basically congest the middle of the pitch as much as possible, use kind of high energy players to pick out Jorginho and Cover. And then just hope that we start shifting the ball wide, because really there's no massively obvious option or really high quality pass for those guys to make. And we see it all the time. The amount of times that Reece has to come back inside, Marcus has to come back inside, because either they don't have the confidence in the player they're passing to sort of maintain possession, or there's no pass on at all. It kind of really sort of stagnates the way that we play. But though I think for me it was that midfield 4 was probably the big difference compared to what I've seen previously with teams. And I think, again, if I'm maybe Fulham or if I'm maybe Brighton will just play the way they play because that's how they are. But if I'm Fulham, I'm looking at this and thinking, yep, this is definitely a way that we can get to grips with this midfield and actually possibly beat Chelsea on the counter in the same way that West Brom did.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to try to pivot a little, no pun intended.
That was very intentional.
So to another interesting topic. So here on NBC Sports, I don't know if you actually saw it on your network provider that you watched the game on, but they showed us that at halftime, Pulisic was actually meant to go on the pitch. He ran for 5-10 meters and then walked right off. And then that's why we saw that we were waiting for Timo, because Timo was actually supposed to get substituted instead of Pulisic. So here I was at halftime fuming that Pulisic wasn't playing, but it turns out that he was injured. And so 2 questions here. Do you think that Pulisic should have just started the game and tried to tough it out a little bit, or do you think he was being preventative because of the hamstring? Because Tuchel looked upset. You're spending a whole 15 minutes creating a game plan that doesn't involve Timo, that does involve Pulisic, 2 very different types of players, and Pulisic is just saying, no, I can't. I feel it. And then what are the implications for Pulisic as well? Because he is somebody who has not been in the starting 11. And I was hoping that this was a really good game for him to get some game time to start trying to build up his fitness a little bit, because I do think that he's a player that you probably need a consistent number of games in order to get the best out of him. He's not going to just come off the bench and change the game for you. But do you think that could speak badly of him, that he didn't give it a go? Was he just being preventative? And what about Pulisic in the future? Like, is it worth it now, because he's so injury prone, he just can't stay fit, and that hurts me so much to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favourite sayings from watching Hard Knocks, the NFL series that sort of does the behind the scenes in pre-season, was you can't make the club from the tub, which basically means it's impossible to make the team if you're constantly on, in the rehab room, basically. I have a feeling, and I've felt this about Christian Pulisic for a while, that he has such a strong desire to rekindle that sort of post-lockdown period in terms of form. Yeah. That I think that he isn't giving himself sufficient time to fully recover from these injuries, because muscle injuries are not things that just happen. They're sort of from accumulated sort of fatigue over time. The more time under tension, stress, etc., you put on the body, the more likely that things kind of eventually break down. It wouldn't have just gone from him jogging out on the pitch and then saying, he needed to come back. I have a sneaky suspicion that his desire to play and to be picked and to start and to sort of, kind of almost like feel worthy of the number 10 shirt, inheriting it from Eden Hazard, all this sort of stuff that I think plays in his head.
That's not spoken about enough. I've said that a lot on my streams, that the number 10 shirt, like, you must feel a responsibility, especially with the Eden Hazard comparisons as well. So
and I think if he didn't have that post lockdown kind of period of form, I don't think it would be. I think maybe he would be a little bit easier on himself in many respects, because just see the way that he is, the desire that he has to play and play well, I think completely supersedes maybe all the logic in his head that says I maybe shouldn't be be running on this, or that I feel some tightness in my hamstring, etc. And he does strike me as a player, and I think I've said this on a few different streams and podcasts, that he does need to be as close to physically fit to really impact the game, because the difference, or the difference maker that he has, is that he has blistering speed, and he can do that while dribbling with the ball. You know, I think back to the Liverpool game, I think back to a handful of games actually in that post-lockdown period, where his pace and his ability to be direct, that is what terrifies people, because, you know, change of a direction, plus the pace, plus the finishing that he had at that point in his career here, you know, that was what was starting to make him really become the focal point of the Chelsea team. You know, the guy who deserved the number 10 shirt, the guy who really was going to be sort of, you know, maybe the guy that we built around in terms of play style and everything that you can kind of throw at him. I have really, really big concerns about his future at Chelsea now. And again, this doesn't speak to anything in terms of his talent, in terms of his upside, his application, etc. But there's only so many times that you can look at a player, give them an opportunity. Now he might be out for another 4, 5, 6 weeks. Nobody knows the severity of it at the moment. But you would have to think, to come off at half time at that point, when you're literally just about to kick off again, that it must have been fairly serious, because seeing his personality, I would assume that he would try to play through it. And we come back to square one again. You know, it seems a Christian that you can take 1 or 2 steps forward. Like he scored today. I don't think he was outstanding, but you know, the mark of a good player is if you're not playing particularly well, but you can still do something that impacts the game. He scored the goal. His anticipation of the ball hitting the post, being in front of the defender, all of that stuff that's what you want to see. But then now he could be out of the team for 4 to 6 weeks. Someone may come in and play really well, and then they have the shirt for that period of time. It just feels like since the kind of the heights that he reached, that his career has just been kind of just plagued by injury. And you know, as much as I want him to come and find that kind of form that we've seen, I personally think that the best thing for him would just be to go have an extended rest. And I do think that he does need to start seeing a specialist about some of these muscle injuries, because it's a frequency, or a level of frequency now where I think it is getting into sort of the red danger territory in terms of being concerning. I even think back to the Barnsley game a couple of weeks ago, where he pulled up in the first couple of minutes and then carried on playing. It's, you know, if this is going to be sort of if this is the Pulisic that we have, the guy who's permanently injured, you know, you have to kind of question what his value is to the club. And as harsh as that is as a statement, you know, it's going to be the way that the club potentially sort of evaluate him coming into this summer. But I do want him to figure out what's going wrong. It could be that, you know, he has some sort of back problems which are contributing to lower you know, extremity issues or whatever it may be. But the club and Christian clearly haven't figured out what's wrong, because he keeps getting injured. He keeps getting muscle injuries. So take the time out, find a specialist, work with a specialist, try and get some sort of plan together. You know, use Arjen Robben as inspiration. One of the reasons that he left Chelsea was because he played 20 league games a season, if that, you know, in the early 2000s. I think Chelsea fans would have loved to have kept him for the entirety of his career, considering how well he went on to do at Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, etc. But Arjen's dad often spoke about him needing to completely change his training regimen, his approach to fitness, conditioning, strength and conditioning after leaving Chelsea, because, you know, I think his dad made the point that Chelsea were right to sell him at that point because they felt that he was kind of broken. Obviously, he went on to prove us quite wrong quite significantly. But I would hate to have Christian then, you know, leave Chelsea and then go on to have this supreme career elsewhere. I would like him to figure that out while he's here, because if we can get another Arjen Robben, I would like to have them at the club. And we do know that we do like to sell good players a little bit too soon in some occasions. So I want him to figure things out, but I do think he has to take some ownership of the situation, either with the club or with his own people. And figure out what is wrong, whether it's biomechanics or muscular, whatever it might be, and then put a plan together to actually make sure that he can start playing football at the level that we know he can. Because when he can, he's an absolutely fantastic, wonderful player. But at the moment, we're just not seeing it enough, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you spoke on so many good points. I think another thing is, like, he's the captain of the US team. Like the entire, like, he's so young, and he has like an entire country that, like, he is the football star, you know. Like, if we're looking at the Premier League, you know, a lot of people follow the Premier League for Christian Pulisic because he's American and he has that added weight as well. And, I don't think that having such a condensed period of so many games so quickly, which just isn't normal, I don't think that that's helpful at all. We're seeing just an abnormal amount of injuries across the board this season. But I do think you're right that he's probably forcing himself a little too quickly to come back. He probably feels like this pressure and like this pride, like, oh, I need to perform for my team. I need to get better. I'm the number 10 and look at what I did. I helped to secure top 4 after the restart. I want to contribute positively again. And he's probably rushing himself back a little bit. But like you said, I hope that he sorts it out. I honestly would give it at least 1 more year. I think that like if we sold him this summer, it would be a little bit too early. If you have, 2-3 years where he's just out completely, then it's one of those things where do you see him getting better and then you can sell him potentially for more money, or do you to hold him on, hope that he gets better and then he ends up not playing even more and then his value decreases. So it really could go either way, but I would just like to see him with a proper preseason with proper training. I also don't think that he's playing in like the most favorable position for him. Like
true, very true.
Yeah, he was really playing as like a 10 false 9, like through the middle, like even more than Timo, and Marcus Alonso was actually occupying like the space that Christian Pulisic usually occupies. So I think if we saw him more in like a natural position as well, that could be beneficial to him. But he's just like, he has the potential to be such a special player that I really hope that he can sort out his injuries and get back to his best, because he's just so good. So just a couple more questions for you, Joe, before we close this out. So another player that I wanted to talk about that we were messaging about is Timo Werner. Mm-hmm. And he's somebody who I think a lot of people can agree has gotten a lot of game time under Thomas Tuchel. I think perhaps one of the reasons that Tuchel was brought in was to try to mesh all of these summer signings that Chelsea bought, like Timo Werner and Kai Havertz, that they cost a lot of money, and Chelsea obviously want to see them play and to do well. And we've seen that even the system has been tweaked to Timo Werner. And while he has some little sparks, like he gets some assists, he's been winning some penalties, his pace can be useful. But even then, for the amount that Chelsea paid for him and for the amount that he was scoring in the Bundesliga, it just feels like it's not currently enough. So how do you feel about that? And how do you feel about Tammy, not even making the team? It's rumored that he is apparently fit. We really don't know if he's fit or not. You also have Giroud out there. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah, Timo is an interesting one for me. I'm not sure I can recall maybe a player who has, I want to say underperformed, because I think statistically people will point to that he's had a fairly good season. But I think if you really watch the games, I think as a lot of fans do, I think that you would probably say that this season he has underperformed. I think certainly under Tuchel, the commitment from him to continuously play him and try and create a system that sort of works to his strengths. I do find it a little bit strange, because I think he's being back to maybe an extent that potentially other players, I'm looking maybe at Tammy here, and I'll go on to speak about Tammy in a second. The thing with Timo, a lot of his success in Germany came from playing in a 2 up front, and not sort of as a wide forward. In most cases, like actually playing in a 2-striker system at Red Bull. Poulsen was the guy that he played with up front. I think that asking him to lead the line in the Premier League is suicidal in terms of what his skill set is. One of the main things that Chelsea, and I'd say a lot of the better teams in the Premier League need this from their centre forwards, is the ability to play back to goal. And what I mean by that is the ability for you to, them to hold off a centre back or a defender. You play the ball into them, chest, fire, whatever it's going to be, and they control the ball, and then they allow the rest of the team to move up the pitch. They bring others into play. That is an absolute bare minimum. Even someone who is not tall like Sergio Aguero is absolutely fantastic at. That's why Sergio Aguero is Sergio Aguero, because he can do all of the stuff that most big target men can do, and then all of the stuff that little Luis Suarez-y type people can do as well. I think with Timo, his inability to play back to goal in the Premier League is one of the biggest reasons he's not had a lot of success. You watch the number of times we play the ball into him, whether it's into his feet, into his chest, or whatever, and then the next touch is a tackle or he loses the ball, for example. that probably is why I think he's struggled a little bit. And even then, the way Premier League teams play us compared to in Germany, we saw today West Brom are going to sit on the edge of their penalty area. What's the point of being able to run the 100 meters in under 11 seconds if you've got 1 meter to run into? I'm not going to say a lot of his goals, but a significant portion of his goals in Germany, if you watch them on the highlights, he's running into like 30, 40 meters of space in a lot of these instances. So to ask somebody who maybe doesn't have the technical skill set to beat players, or maybe doesn't have the right level of touch, or doesn't have that kind of, without being too horrible, I mean, his footwork and stuff like that to me is a little bit disastrous at times. The way that I find it sometimes comical that a player of his supposed quality can't control a football that's coming at him in the penalty area. Today, I think one bobbled over his foot or under his foot or whatever, but it's like a regular occurrence. And then you're going on to his finishing as well. I mean, the decision to pass the mount today was fine. We scored from it. But, if you tell me any top 6 Premier League striker that's going to pass the ball to someone in that situation rather than just slam it into the corner of the goal, obviously lacking confidence, obviously, maybe from that North Macedonia miss in midweek, which went viral, unfortunately for him. But I just don't know with him, because I just don't see how he fits into what we're trying to achieve as a club. As a winger, I don't think he has the technical ability to play wide. He's good on the counter. He's had some good moments, but to regularly really influence play from wide, I don't think he has that. And playing down the middle by himself, it just doesn't get the opportunities that I think he would get in Germany. We don't play quickly enough to put him in terms of trying to play early enough. And the way that teams defend against us, in most cases, it means that he is back to goal. He is having to drop deep, and these aren't his sort of strengths. Sort of moving on to Tammy, and Tammy for me is, I'll start this off by saying he's not Didier Drogba, he's not Diego Costa. Like, I think people that like him are fully aware of this. But then the drop from that level of player to what people think Tammy is, I think is quite unfair at times. I think he's the most well-balanced forward that we have. And I think the thing that he does better than most others is that he kind of links the rest of the team together. Yes, he's not the best at hold up. It has improved, I will say. He's not the best in the air. It has improved. He's not the best in a lot of different things. But I think if you watch him interact with Timo earlier in the season, that's when Timo was playing pretty well. I think he's got a good relationship with all of the other forwards that play as well. And the one thing that he allows you to do is actually go a little bit longer. You can actually play into Tammy, and he can sort of control it and bring others into play. And I think the way that he's been kind of, I don't know if it's sort of been sidelined a little bit, and these sort of words of him being injured, and but he's always in training, and he's always on the YouTube videos behind the scenes, like kicking footballs. I don't know what to make of all that. But one thing I would say is I do believe Chelsea are a better team when he starts. That isn't to say that he's the answer for the future, and that, we shouldn't go and buy a top tier centre forward. But for a club who really has struggled to score goals generally for a long period of time, and maybe in the Roman era has maybe bought 3 good centre forwards in like a nearly 20 years, having a centre forward that can score 15, maybe 20 goals a season, we shouldn't really be turning our noses up at that. Even if they come in bunches, and even all the sort of things that people want to say against him. I still think that I don't know if our top scorer is still Jorginho, who's got like 6 penalties or something stupid. Like, I mean, that is atrocious. Yeah. It's such a bad or damning stat that we don't have a striker or a forward or even a midfielder who's got double digits in the Premier League or whatever it might be. And yeah, I think we're just at a point now where I'm struggling to see reasons why he shouldn't play. And people can be negative about him and say that he's not this, and this, and this. It's fine. Nobody's making the argument that he is Erling Haaland or Romelu Lukaku. But in a team that can't score, Tammy can score goals. And sometimes football is a little bit simple, and you have to simplify things. If you can't score goals, put the guy in front, or put the guy up front who has at least shown an ability to score goals in his Chelsea career. And as I said, the main thing really with Tammy as well is I just think he links the attack better. If the ball comes into him, yes, he doesn't win everything. Completely agree with people who say that. But if the ball sticks 2 out of 3 times, that's 2 times more than it does with anyone else. And I think for us to develop the style of play, or to be a little bit more threatening, a bit more attacking, you have to have the ability to play into your centre forward and for him to keep the ball. And I think Giroud is also good at that, but I just think Giroud's maybe lack of mobility counts against him. Tammy can do the hold-up stuff, but he can also run the channels. He can run in behind. And from a personal standpoint, he would be the guy that I would I would like to see lead the line for the rest of the season, just because I think, A, he can score, but also, like I said, I think he's a better fit for the team and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, really well said. I just wanted to touch on this. Doesn't matter where you score from. If you're scoring goals, I really could not care less because nobody else is doing this. So I really don't care if scoring his goals. He's getting goals that people are not getting. So
the point that's popped up here today, I think Reece put 2 crosses in that went across the 6-yard box that nobody was there for.
Yeah, nobody. We're like statues.
Yeah, and that's where Tammy gets his goals. And it's the same. Okay, Diego Costa and Drogba. The thing that separates them from other big strikers is they could score from nothing. When I think of Cross, I think of that goal against West Brom. I think Fabregas launched it down the touchline. It was in the corner. Costa went over, bullied a centre back, ran into the area, slammed it in the top corner, and I was like, okay, that's a proper centre forward. Maybe Tammy can't do that. Not many people in world football can do that, is what I would say to people who say that. But Tammy scores goals, and ultimately, as I say, we're in a situation where we have 5 million% of the ball. We have all the territory in the world. We are creating some chances, but nobody seems to be able to score them. So maybe put the striker up front who has at least shown that he can score goals in a Chelsea shirt. And yes, he's not the future long-term answer, for what people are saying. He may eventually be, but he's not at the moment. But for the rest of the season, it has to be, for me at least, it has to be Tammy, because he can score. We shouldn't overcomplicate things.
And I feel like for these players that kind of find themselves on the fringes a little bit, like you're like Tammy, Kai Havertz for a little bit, Ziyech for a bit, Pulisic, there's just such a surplus of Chelsea attackers. It's really difficult to be called upon and to perform when you really don't have that consistent game time and you're not playing with the same front 3 or front 4, whatever your attackers you're playing with. And I understand that Tuchel is trying to adjust to the opposition, which I like that. And I think that there's a lot of games as well, and he's just trying to kind of figure out his best attacking formation still. But at the same time, it doesn't really help when, Timo Werner isn't really scoring goals. So at this point, I would probably give somebody else a shot and just give them a game or two and see if they can take it. And if they start scoring goals, then perfect. If not, you can try Timo again. But like you said, I feel like Timo, we saw it in the Atletico game that he was really, really good for when he has a lot of space. But even then, he has had opportunities for goals where he's had a lot of space and he's just kind of fluffed it because he's so low on confidence. So perhaps the best thing for him could just be to kind of put him on the sidelines a bit. There's only a couple of games left in the rest of the season, and then he can kind of be out of the limelight. We've seen that kind of tends to work with players, and then start afresh, start new in the upcoming season as well. And I think Tammy could perfectly do a job, and he's used to playing against these sides that are more physical, that are lower blocks, where you're not going to get as much time and space on the ball. And he another thing that I think kind of goes unnoticed is that when you have these academy players like a Reece James, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Tammy Abraham, Mason Mount as well, they've been playing together for so many years that they already have a bit of an understanding with each other. So you see a lot of Callum and Reece link up, or Tammy and Reece link up, or Mount and Callum, or whatever it is, because they understand each other, they understand where they want the ball. And that's something that our attack is kind of missing right now. They're missing that chemistry. I don't think they I saw Pulisic make a run, but the ball got passed backwards, and we're just really lacking that. I feel like sometimes players will make a run and it doesn't get picked out, or other times, you have somebody like Ziyech who tries to pick a pass and then they're just not on the same page at all. So that's something to think about as well. But just one more question for you. I know you have to go, but so how do you move forward from this? How you have a Porto game on Wednesday, quarterfinal of the Champions League. How do you put this behind you? How do you learn from it? How are you feeling about that game?
Oh, a lot less confident than I was. I was a couple of hours ago.
Oh, yes.
I mean, so I'm kind of acutely aware that Porto are actually a fairly good team. Exactly, yeah, and I think Chelsea fans were super happy they are, and this is no disrespect to them, they are the quote unquote worst team left in the draw, but they're still very good. They beat Juventus. They are still a very good team. It was just the quote unquote easiest draw that we could have. I think in terms of confidence and maybe the approach we should take, I think it's just go back to basics. I think this game, certainly, I think technically, is it away the first leg? Technically, I know we're playing in Seville.
Yeah.
Technically away. A little bit, I would set up maybe similar to what we saw against Atletico Madrid. Keep it nice and solid, and then see how sort of the ball possession kind of works out. If we're super dominant, try to nick an away goal. I think that they're so valuable in this competition. I would just try to simplify things. I think Kante is going to be an enormous miss. Certainly, if we have to play Cover and Jorginho again after that game, I'm not sure how their confidence is going to be. And again, this isn't taking shots at them. It's just, after you've had a bad performance as a team, the midfield for me is always the engine room. It's the focal point. Going into the next game with the same guys, I would like to have maybe dropped Kante in there, or maybe even Mason Mount at this point. But it's getting back to basics, doing the things that I think got us to this position, and not sort of overcomplicating things, and not trying to maybe do too much. And then just really, just sort of seeing how that pans out. I do feel a little bit that today hopefully is useful in the long run, because it gives us a good reality check, and now we'll see how the team can respond under Tuchel. And I do hope that is positive. What would concern me if we saw a similar performance to what we saw against West Brom, maybe not in terms of the result, but just the actual level of performance as well. That would be concerning. But I would go back to basics. Christensen back in. I think his form merits that he should be starting in that role. Yeah. Not something that I ever felt that I would personally say aloud on the stream, but bring Antonio Rudiger back in as a centre back. Probably Chilwell maybe on the left hand side. I think you could see for one of the goals, Alonso really struggled to get back. And again, Porto have that counter-attacking ability. They have pace out wide. As much as I love Marcos Alonso goal hanging and trying to score world-class goals, sort of worldy volleys, I would rather have Chilwell's athleticism and ability to get back there. So maybe a few changes in personnel, but I would just go completely simplified the game approach, simplified the game model. We actually have time to prepare for this game as well, which I think will come in, as you say, coming back and having like 10 minutes to figure out a game plan because of the internationals isn't ideal. So I'm hoping that we go in with more structure and just, a boring 1-0 is what I'm hoping for Chelsea. I'm not here for the glorious football at this point in time. I'm here for boring 1-0s. And, if he wants to play a back 8, I'm absolutely fine with that. Whatever he wants to do. But I think it's just a question of using this as a platform to bounce back now.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what the starting 11 is going to be. I really question who's going to be starting in this game. I have no idea. I used to be really good at picking the starting 11s. Now since Tuchel's taken over, I've just completely lost my he never picks the same starting 11. It's impossible to know. So it's going to be interesting to see if he trusts Timo Werner to start again. Maybe Kai Havertz, we'll see. Maybe Ziyech for his Champions League experience. It really could go a ton of ways. But Joe, we've gone a little bit over. I wasn't expecting to talk this long about this game, but I really appreciate it. It really helps me a lot. It's been a really great therapy session, and really so I really appreciate it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video as well. And Joe, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate it. It's been, has been nice to get some of this out, which is always good. You can find me on socials at Joe Tweedie. And in terms of podcasts, I think if you search The King's Road in pretty much any platform now, you'll find the first episode that I released recently of the new podcast that I'm doing. And I have a newsletter on the London is Blue Patreon, which comes out every Monday. And I really enjoy writing, maybe not so much this week because there's a bit too much negative stuff to dig into, but generally it's normally a lovely positive start to your week. But we shall see. But thank you, Ellie. Really appreciate being on. And hopefully next time I'm on, it's after we've beat someone like 6-0 or something like that, and we can be more positive.
I miss those games. I really do. I said in my preview video, I just want a bashing, but in I didn't want Chelsea to get bashed. It feels like it's been a while, but I'll make sure to add your socials and where to find you in the description. I just did it super quick since we had it very last minute.
Organize this in 2 minutes.
Literally, I was like, okay, let me make the thumbnail in 2 minutes. I'll send you the link. Let's go. But honestly, it's really nice to be able to just message you and say, hey, you want to hop on a stream, and you joined. So that's really awesome. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Honestly, I know that it wasn't the best game, but hopefully that this was helpful to you and helped to sort out your thoughts as well. And hopefully we have some more positivity going into this Porto game. So thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And until next time, I'm out.